Good morning. I'm going to use my mom voice. Good morning. Welcome to the University of St. Thomas on this snowy day. And when you remove the snow, the icy sidewalks, I'm glad you're all here safely. So I'm so pleased to have all of you here today for our Prenatal to 3 Policy Forum. I was teasing Catherine that it would be good if she could let me know ahead of time next year when all the meetings are so that we can plan the snow days. So it's been a while since we all have met, and we are so glad to be able to do this today, and I suspect people will be coming in as they can today. I want to thank Catherine for organizing all of this, and so with no further ado, let me introduce Representative Dave Pinto.
Good morning. Thanks to all who made it physically in, and a special hello and thank you to the folks on our webcast. I know we had more than 200 people registered today, and so I know a number of them were not able to make it in physically, so glad to have you here virtually. To remind folks, the January forum was canceled because of snow, and my constituent and volunteer Jessica said, if it snows in July, I'm going to be blaming for the next forum, we're blaming the forum. So a reminder to folks that these forums are held quarterly and were founded originally by the Elders for Infants, a group of retired early childhood professionals, and myself, and now joined by Senator Jerry Ralph and the St. Kate's and St. Thomas School of Social Work. And the background on the forums is on the back of the agenda for those here in person. And for those watching the webcast, if you go to p3minnesota.org, you will see discussion and kind of look at about the forums. And I think it's really important that we just kind of continue to focus ourselves on the purposes of the forums, which, as is noted there, is to share plans among these coalitions, to establish a common base of knowledge, and to build relationships over the course of time together. So we have a great program today, and I'm so grateful to everybody for joining us in whatever form they are. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to my partner from the Senate, Senator Jerry Ralphs. Please join me in welcoming him.
Well, again, I want to echo Representative Pinto's thanks for all of you for braving the weather and the roads. It was quite a challenge, I think, getting here and getting down here. So thank you for coming, and thank you those who are joining us on the webcast. Just a couple of quick comments. We're moving along quickly in the legislature, and things are going to start to accelerate now that we've pretty much reached committee deadlines. There's more initiatives that I want to go through, I think, that are working on childhood policy. So I'll just say that we've got the kiddos in mind as we're moving forward, and I think that's the important thing. And other than that, welcome, and please thank you for coming.
Because we do have quite a few people, we believe, tuned in terms of the webinar, I just want to, and also to people in the audience, if you want to submit a question, Jessica, who sits up here in front, has reminded me, and I'm going to hold this up. This is for the camera, but it means nothing to, probably, you can't read it from there, but it's P2, as in T-O, 3, okay, forum. Policy forum. Oh God, here we go. So forget it. Start over, Jane. Okay, so PTO3 policy forum at gmail.com. So that's the email address that's working for questions. So I just want to point that out, and to our speakers, I'm just mentioning Jessica's going to be the timekeeper, so she'll be religiously waving her times at you, but we're going to adjust slightly because we're starting a little late. So without any more delay, I just want to happily introduce Erin Sojourner from the Carlson School of Management. And it's wonderful to have a labor economist working on a very critical issue that I think faces our field and faces the future for our youngest children and their families. So Erin, welcome.
Thank you all for inviting me to address the forum, and thank you for your work pulling the community together around these issues. It's really critical to the future of our state and our communities and our families. I'm going to talk to you about evidence about the first 1,000 days of kids' lives, the first 3 years of kids' lives. And it matters tremendously. It matters whether we pay attention to it or whether we don't pay attention to it. It matters for better or for worse. Some basic premise is that people drive community success. You can't have a successful, flourishing community without successful, flourishing people. And wise investment in people drives that success. So, yeah, I'm a labor economist. I believe people drive things, our skills, our capacities, and those are created not all at once, but through a process of human development. And investing in people, just like investing in machines or investing in other forms of productive capacity, that's what drives innovation, that's what drives growth. So today I'm going to try to get through 3 pieces of research. The first one is about the idea that income-based gaps in skills, gaps between kids from low-income families and high-income families. These skill gaps open up very early in life, but they are not inevitable. We see them all around us, but that does not mean they're inevitable. And in fact, we can see a lot of evidence that they're amenable to change, that if you change kids' early experiences, you change their outcomes. It's not an immutable fact of nature. It's a choice that we make as a community to get these results. The second thing is that the way we have it set up now is structured so that we ask and demand the most of families when they have the least. Families are poorest. Families have the least savings, the least earning power, the least borrowing power when their kids are young. They have the least access to resources when their kids are young, but that's exactly when we demand the most of them. And of course, they cannot generate the resources to invest in their kids in this time. And what do we expect to happen? There's no other possible thing that could happen but what we see. And it calls attention to the fact that we invest a lot later, but we don't invest much early, and we get these results. And I'm going to show you a lot of evidence about that. The third thing is I want to share some early results from some research that I'm doing with others, Liz Davis at the U included, to measure Minnesota families' access to early care and education services. So we've built new measures of access that are family-centered, that look around at the ECE service market from families' perspectives and measures where is there pain, where is there low supply, where is there high costs, where are there low quality, and where are things a little bit better off. And I'm going to show you some early results from that and tell you about work we're continuing to do. All right, so the first thesis, income-based gaps in skill open up early, but they're not inevitable. And these gaps have lifelong impacts. So this graph this is research from the Child Development Journal. On the horizontal here, you have average prenatal to age 5, so average early childhood income of a child when they were young. And on the vertical, you have their average annual adult work hours, okay? So what you see here is the relationship between a kid's early experiences in their first 5 years, how much income did their family have, and how much did they contribute to the economy, to their neighbors, to the community through work as an adult. And you can see a really strong relationship, especially at the very bottom end, that kids who are in very low-income families end up not working so much as adults. And this shouldn't be surprising, I guess, but I think it's really valuable to see that the experiences and choices, in the first few years are connected to things that happen decades later and have effects on families and communities decades later. This is research from the Council of Economic Advisors, and what it shows you is how do skill gaps open up as a function of children's age. So on the horizontal, you have kids' age, and on the vertical, you have test scores. And the blue line shows you test scores basically for kids of the highest income families, and the top fifth. And the orange line shows you scores for kids from families in the bottom fifth of income, so low-income families. And what you see is that over the first 5 years, these skill gaps open up. But then they're kind of stable. Once K-12 starts, there's different ways to think about this. There's bigger inequalities and experiences early on before K-12 because it's just left on the family, and so you might see these gaps opening up early. Or you could think of the K-12 system coming in and stopping the gap from widening. But either way, there's this disjuncture. And if we wait until 5 or 4, we're waiting late. These gaps already exist, and we're investing a lot starting at age 5, maybe now starting at age 4, but we're not going to solve the problem that way. So this is from a journal called PLOS One, and they on the horizontal again you have kids' age. This one starts at age 5 months and goes up to age 37 months, so age like the kid's 3rd birthday basically. And they did brain scans of gray matter, and the blue line is kids from low SES families, socioeconomic status, so low income, low education parents, families. The green line on top is kids from high SES families. And what you see is that in the first year of kids' life, there's not much difference, but then this trajectory widens. And so by age 3, you can see physical, cognitive manifestations of this skill gap getting hardwired into kids' brains. And the first few years of kids' life is when their brains are forming, when it doesn't stop changing later, but this is the time of most rapid development and time when sort of the foundation is cast and set. Now, why might you see this widening of the skill gap, this widening of sort of cognitive architecture? One story is, well, these are different kinds of people. They have different kinds of genetics. They have different, there's nothing we can do. This is the Charles Murray thesis, the bell curve thesis, kind of. It's people don't talk about it much in polite society, but it's certainly behind a lot of, I think, people's judgments about what's possible and not possible. Another story is, well, it depends on the environment. It depends on the fact that these kids in these two different kinds of families are having different experiences. And I'll show you some evidence, this is descriptive evidence that shows you, again, another measure of child skill and shows how the gap opens up early. So this is children's vocabulary. This is foundational work by Hart and Risley from 1995. You can see the sample sizes were super small. This is like 35 kids or something, but they measured kids' vocabulary, the growth of their vocabulary over time, from age 12 months, sort of nobody can say much, to 36 months, again, age 3. And the bottom line, again, is children of families on welfare, and the top line is children of professional parents. And you can see like this huge gap opening up. Again, we're just seeing it in terms of IQ tests, we're seeing it in terms of brain architecture, we're seeing it in terms of children's vocabulary. That's all outcomes, that's all child skill. Now I'm going to tell you, this is about the environment they're in, okay? And so this is, again, foundational work You've heard about the word gap, language gap. Kids from low-income families hear a lot less language, engage in much less responsive interchange with adults about talking back and forth, looking at each other, being responsive. There's a lot of evidence that this is the thing that drives brain development, drives skill development, like one-on-one attention from an adult, responsive caregiving. And what you see is that kids from low-income families are growing up in a very different language environment. Now, this is the first evidence. It's not very strong evidence, but this led to another 20 years of research that basically said, yep, they got it right the first time. So I've shown you this big gap between kids' development. I've shown you some evidence of a gap in their experiences. Maybe it's fixed, or maybe we can break this relationship. Can we break this relationship between kids' SES, between their family income and their development, or is this something that's hardwired and inevitable? I'm going to show you some evidence that changing early experiences really can break this relationship, really can close these gaps. So I'm going to tell you about an experiment that was done. This is called the Infant Health and Development Program. This was done in the mid-'80s in 8 cities around the country. They recruited families from research hospitals at Yale, UPenn, University of Arkansas, University of Miami, a bunch of places around the country. They recruited them at birth as the families were giving birth in the hospital. And they randomly assigned, they recruited about 1,000. They randomly assigned about a third of them to have access to high-quality, free childcare in a child development center that the researchers set up, free transportation, full day, abecedarian-based curriculum. Now, this is like the gold standard. This was very intensive, very high-quality care. A lot of supports. 2 years of free care starting from 12 months to 36 months. There was also a year of weekly home visits. They didn't use nurses, they used paraprofessionals. There isn't much evidence that first year had much effects on things, although there's evidence from other places that using nurses for home visiting has generated very good results. These are low birth weight premature infants, but everything I'm going to show you is from the kids who were sort of higher birth weight in this sample. All right, so I have a paper with Greg Duncan where we reanalyzed this data, and the main thing we did was we split the family by their family income, and then we estimated the effects of this offer of free high-quality care for the different subgroups. Most experiments are only for low-income kids. Head Start, Perry, these kinds of things are only for kids from low-income families. This experiment actually included higher-income families as well, so you can get the effects of this offer for kids from higher-income families. So at age 1, 12 months, the treatment among the low-income kids, the treatment group who had access to this 1 year of home visiting, they had a small positive effect on measured child cognitive skill, but it wasn't statistically significant, so it could just be from chance. But after 1 year of access to this free high-quality care, the kids are 22 years old, it had a 1.3 standard deviation effect on the kids' IQ. And after 2 years, it was 1.6 standard deviations. I don't know how to, I'm going to try to communicate how big that is to you. That is just massive, okay? It's really, basically, I think the best way to communicate it is to say that if you compare the kids in the low-income sample who had access to this at age 2 and age 3, they were outperforming high-income kids in the control group, okay? So their IQ scores were above just the average upper-income kid. It's not genetics. I mean, genetics certainly have something to do with human development, but if it was baked in the cake, if early experiences didn't matter, that would not show up. It stopped at age 36 months. It was designed this way. On the kid's 3rd birthday, they said, good luck to you. Here's some resources available in the community. We'll check back with you later, see how you're doing. So what do you think the effects are going to be at age 5, age 8, age 18? So they did follow-ups 3 more times with these kids. You've heard about fade out, you know, nothing systematically different between the treatment and control groups now after the kid's 3rd birthday. So in fact, 2 years later at kindergarten entry, there's still a 0.6 statistically significant 0.6 standard deviation effect of this intervention. That means like they're not quite at the same, they've fallen now behind the high income control group kids, but it's still closed about 70% of the gap, okay? And this is 2 years later, after the intervention ended. 5 years after the intervention ended, at 3rd grade, it's still a half a standard deviation effect. So it's still like on the order of 70% of the gap is closed. And at age 18, it's still more than 1/3 of a standard deviation. Although it's not statistically significant at that point, they lost about 1/3 of the sample from attrition. They couldn't find them. So, but I read that as still evidence consistent with a persistent effect. Now, what happened to the high-income kids? So this is all just about comparing the low-income kids who got the treatment to the low-income kids who didn't get the treatment. But we also have an experiment among the higher-income kids. And what do you think the effect trajectory is going to be for them? So let's see. So they, you know, after the year of home visits, nothing much. After a year of access to this high-quality early learning environment, between 12 and 24 months, a 0.4 standard deviation effect. That's actually a really big effect. Most interventions, if you get 0.2, you're pretty happy. So 0.4 is massive. It looks tiny only in comparison to this other thing, which is just mind-blowingly big, okay? So it helped them, but it certainly helped them a lot less than it helped the low-income kids from low-income families. And another year later, at the end of the intervention, 0.3 standard deviations. But at age 5, at age 8, at age 18, actually the kids who had access to this from the high-income group weren't doing any better. They weren't doing statistically any different than the control group. In fact, you know, the estimate is they were doing a little worse. They had good, the control group kids from high-income families had pretty good environments no matter what. The policy, the offer of this high-quality care wasn't making a big difference for them. Okay? All right. So you guys all know Rolnick's work and Grunwald's here. Thank you. These guys have done great work developing and estimating the idea of what are the returns to early childhood investment. This is work that follows on theirs by Nobel laureate James Heckman, University of Chicago economist Heckman. He looks at the returns to early childhood investment in the peri-preschool program. Basically, you know, we have to invest this money here. There's costs up front, like any investment, but then there's payoffs down the road. You know, same with building a bridge or buying a machine for your factory or whatever. You pay up front, but it delivers a stream of benefits down the road. He estimates about 8% at the between 8 and 11 or 12% rate of return, okay? As a benchmark, I want to tell you that the stock market in real terms has returned less than 6% since World War II. So private capital left in the private economy returns about 6% on average. But these early childhood investments are returning 8, 12, something on that order. And I want to tell you that 8% is much more than double 6%. That sounds weird, but it's true. 8% return is worth much more than double 6% return. Because if you invest $1 at 0%, okay, that's the blue line. 50 years later, you still got $1. If you invest it at 6%, 50 years later, you end up with about $20. If you invest it at 8%, you end up with $50, okay? So people don't have a good intuition for exponential growth and rates of return. 8% is huge. It's much better than 6% rate of return in the market. And we have this thing where the brain's ability to change in response to experiences is highest, earliest in a kid's life. And we can change things later in their lives, but often it requires more effort and more resources. And especially with cognitive development. Okay, so I hope I've convinced you early experiences matter. 0 to 3 is a critical time in kids' development, and putting more resources into improving the quality of their experiences can generate big returns. It's not a guarantee that any money we throw at this thing is going to deliver those returns. In fact, I think that's wrong. There's plenty of low-quality care experiences that are subsidized that don't have good effects, don't generate returns. This is a gold standard. These are gold standard kind of programs. Now I want to tell you the second theme, which is that the way we have our policy structured now, we ask the most of families when they have the least. And I think this is really important for understanding why the returns to early childhood investment are so high. It's kind of mysterious. If you're an economist, you think, well, if there's all these high returns, why don't resources flow to it? Why aren't families investing if the returns are really so high? But in fact, they're credit constrained. They can't invest the resources. They don't have access to the resources. This work comes up, I spent a year working at the White House Council of Economic Advisors, the end of the Obama administration, the beginning of the Trump administration. This is a brief that I helped work on, that I led when I was there. You can find it online, but I'll just tour through some of the results. The basic idea is that families have the most private responsibility early in kids' lives, 0 to 5, but they have the least resources early in kids' lives. And this creates a big problem for families and for kids and for communities. So let's put some numbers on it. I know you guys invited an economist because you want numbers. So this graph shows you, we added up as best we could all the public investments, all the public expenditures on kids by child age. So this includes EITC, this includes SNAP, this includes Head Start, this includes state pre-K, this includes K-12, this includes Medicaid, it includes health, education, social assistance, tax credits, tax transfers, everything that we could get, okay? And what you see is that when kids are 0 to 3, we're investing about $9,000 a year per kid. But when they're 5 or 4, we're investing about $10,000 a year. But when they're 6, K-12 kicks in, and we're investing $16,000 a year. And when they're 18, we're investing basically the same. Okay? So we invest the least in families when their kids are youngest. And this shows you, there's a lot of information here. I would refer you to the report if you want to dig into it more. This shows you, this looks at child time use, okay? So it looks at how many hours do kids spend in different kinds of care as a function of children's age. So when kids are youngest, it's on the bottom, the first year of life. And what it shows you is that families are responsible for more than 90% of the care. That means, and that's, it might be great that the parents, the green represents the hours that are spent during the standard work week with a parent, and it's close to 80%. And then there's unpaid friend and family care is the gray, and then there's private market-based care, which is the blue, and the orange is what's left is any kind of public ECE, so Head Start, CCAP, that kind of stuff, okay? And we're covering we're helping with 2 or 3%. There's also, and you can see as the kids get older, not until they're 3 or 4 does any public subsidy really kick in at any level besides negligible. But then once the kid hits 5, then they get into public K-8 and or K-12, and all of a sudden we take this big care responsibility off of the family's budget. And but those first 5 years, the family is responsible for so much, and that's what I mean by we ask the most of families when the kids are youngest. Okay. Now, you could like subsidizing childcare, or you might not. You might think, well, it's better for the parent to stay home. And if you think that's the right thing, that's cool. But we don't enable that either. And we just leave families hanging. And we can talk about ways to do that if you want. This shows you current, so when the kids are youngest, so we did an analysis where we looked at parents' labor markets, earnings and wages and things like that as a function of their youngest child age. And so we're saying when your children are younger, you are younger. And when you are younger, you've had less years to save, right? So you have less past earnings. You also have less earning power than when you're kids and you are older. So if you look at the hourly wage that a parent can earn as a function of their youngest kid's age, you'll see that, and we take the average across all parents with kids under 18, and then we show these deviations from the average. So when your kids are 0 to 2, your earning power hourly is about 8% less than it is on average over the course of your kids' development. And when your kids are about to go to college, your earning power is about 10% higher than average. So that's 18% of the mean difference. Also, the care burden is much higher, as I just showed you. So the number of hours that you work is much less when your kids are younger, and you can work much more when your kids are older, right? This should come as no surprise. But that means that your past earnings are less, and your current earning power and current earnings is less. You might think to yourself, well, maybe they could borrow. They're young, they could borrow. They should be, if this is a good investment, they should borrow to finance this investment. So we looked at credit scores as a function of child age, and we found that the share, this is just one measure, but we found that the share of parents with a credit score of 650 or above is lower for parents with the youngest kids. So that means they have less access to future income. They have lower credit. They can't borrow as much as they can when their kids are older. And everything I'm telling you here isn't about a difference between a low-income parent and a high-income parent. Everything I'm telling you here is about every single family. We ask the most when they have the least. Okay? It's worse if you look at low-income families or if you look at parents with less education. This crunch that they're in is worse, but it's true for every family. So, how many types of income are there? How many types of private resources are there? I'm going to say there are 3. There's past, present, and future. And parents of young kids have less of every single one. Is it a surprise then that they can't invest in their kids' development and generate, like putting them into high quality experiences, either staying out of the workforce to stay home and care for them or to purchase high quality care? What else would what other possible thing could happen? There's no magic solution here. Like there's just not enough resources in the family at that time. And we come in later and we say, we're going to lighten that burden for you. And it's a productive investment. K-12 is a highly productive investment. But here we have a highly productive investment opportunity sitting on the table. And the families aren't seizing it. They're credit constrained. We don't have that excuse. We have a lot of resources. So another angle to look at it is, well, the costs are different too. So maybe part of the reason we don't invest early is because it's cheaper to provide care early. So we don't need to put so many dollars to it. But in fact, it's not true. Like infants and toddlers, you need one adult with a few kids. You cannot produce this stuff cheaply and well. You could produce it cheaply and badly, or well, but it's not going to be cheap. The production technology is really quite simple. There's not a lot of economizing that can be done. You need an adult with the kid, maybe with 2 or 3 or I don't know. Remember if it's 4 is the ratio here, but 3 or 4 is about the max. And if you've ever tried to care for an infant or 2, that's a lot. I've done it. It's a lot. 3 is, God bless you, that's hard. So it's not like there's some magic solution that's going to come in and lower the cost, because the production is so dead simple, and you need to pay for an adult to spend time with that kid. And you need to put them in a warm, dry room, and you need to have some, toys and diapers and food, and it's simple. And it's great because it's very transparent, but it's terrible because you just can't escape the math. Like, if you want a parent to stay home, well, that costs the parent's wages, right? Because they're not working. And that's $20,000, that's $30,000, that's $50,000, whatever that parent would make outside. Or you can let the parent work and hire somebody to parent for, to care for the kid. And maybe you can pool across a couple kids there and you get to divide the cost. But it still ends up being, $10,000, $15,000, $9,000. There's just no way to do it cheap. All right, so what else would we possibly expect? So that's the end of my second point. Now I'm going to tell you about some research that we're doing to try to help build tools that policymakers can use, and people who are making choices about where to invest resources, either public or private resources, to improve the early care and education system in Minnesota. We're trying to build tools for them to use. So you've heard a lot of maybe about childcare deserts. This has gotten some attention. You know, I guess I want to say, you know, you hear about all these crises. You hear about the crisis of childcare deserts, low supply. You hear about early childhood workforce being underpaid and high turnover, and there's a crisis about that. You hear about providers going out of business and not being able to keep, you know, run a sustainable business. You hear about families being threatened with homelessness, and young families can't keep a roof over their head. You hear about parents pulled between work and care responsibilities and struggling to earn enough to keep a roof over their head and, you know, parent enough to make sure their kid has a good care experience. All of these crises have the same source, which is that there is not enough resources going into this time of kids' lives. Like, there's not enough private resources to do it, and there's not enough public resources to do it. That's all the resources. So if we wanted to start to move resources towards this time, how could we do it? Where are the high priority areas? Minnesota has done a lot of stuff over the last few years. We've, you know, expanded investment through scholarships, through pre-K, through CCAP, through Head Start. We've been moving resources towards this. We wanted to take a step back and look at how has that impacted families' experiences? How has that impacted their access to early care and education experiences? So we wanted to build a good measure of this that is family-centered. And basically, what we're saying is that access to ECE services, how do you tell high access from low access? Well, high access means there's a lot of supply nearby, and it's low cost, the prices are low, and I don't have to travel very far, so the travel time costs are low. It means that the quality is high, right? So low access is the opposite of all those things. And so we wanted to build measures that incorporate all those factors, because if you can like in every community there's pain. People are telling you about pain that they have trying to like navigate these issues, but they might have different underlying causes. It might be quality, it might be quantity, it might be cost. And so we wanted to give people a diagnostic tool that could help them see, in this community, you know, this is the thing. In that community, that's the thing. And if we want to deploy resources here, maybe we want to deploy them around the thing that is really causing the pain. So proper diagnosis supports proper remedy. So what we did was we got the NACRAWare database. We've gotten a lot of support from Think Small and Close Gap by Fives and DHS and MDE. We've been pulling in data from all kinds of places. But we got a database of all the licensed providers with their address, their capacity, their price by child age, whether they are in the quality rating system. And then we also got census data on how many families with young children live in each census block, basically, which is quite small. That's like in the city, about 4 city blocks. And in a rural area, it's like about, I think, it's less than a square mile, I think. It's pretty small. And so we have these 2 data sources. Over here, this just shows you all the locations of licensed providers in 2015. So we know exactly where the providers are. On that side, we're representing the distribution of the population of families with young children. So we have it at a much more fine-grained level. We don't really know exactly where the families live, but we know within a little zone. and we take out the lakes, and we take out the state forests, and we use the road network data to figure out families live on the road network. And but basically, by looking at both demand and supply together, you can get a sense of where there's not enough slots for the number of young kids. And so we built we built these measures. And I can go into a lot of gory detail about the measures, but I won't. I'll just tell you that they're better than the existing measures. They incorporate distance, so they're not just based on arbitrary administrative boundaries, but they're really about, they allow families to care about and access supply that's close to them in travel time on the road network, rather than in the same zone as them, and to care more about that supply that's closer, and to discount supply if there are a lot of other kids nearby that supply competing for it. So there's a congestion effect that we measure. And basically, so I've zoomed in here I've tried to get part of Senator Ralph's district here. So this is St. Cloud. And what this shows you is basically the dots represent where are families with young children. So the density of the dots tells you this is a neighborhood where a lot of families with young children live. And the color of the dots tells you how much quantity is close by to them. So if it's blue, it means that there's, relatively speaking, within this school district, a lot of supply close to those families, controlling for the other number of kids nearby that supply. And where it's red, it shows you that there's not a lot of supply, that there's a bunch of families there. If you look, right here, this means there's a lot of dots there, and they're all red. It means there's a lot of families there, but not a lot of supply nearby. Over here, there's a lot of families, but there is supply. Over here, there's families, there is supply. Down here, there's families, but not supply. So you can get to thinking about if you're a county commissioner or you own you're a business that provides childcare and you're trying to decide where to open your next location. This will help guide it. This is based on 2015 data. We're updating it to cover all the years. This measures cost. So that was quantity, but this is cost. So now the families are in the same space, but the colors mean something different. So the red dots show you that families in those areas the supply near them is higher priced and farther away. So they have to pay more to travel to get to supply. So we like this measure because it combines both money price and travel cost. So in urban areas, the money price is a big deal, the travel cost isn't. But in rural areas, the travel time is a relatively bigger deal, and the cost is lower. So it puts it all on the same measuring stick. And this one shows you the share of nearby slots that are high rated. And so you can see, again, certain areas, a lot of the supply is high quality. Certain areas it's not. Even down here, there wasn't a lot of supply, but yeah, so the colors are backwards. But so this is low quality. This is low quality. So yeah, this is beta. So we're still working on it. And we're working with Think Small and Slalom Consulting to try to build better user interface. We're not GIS people, but we're trying to make the data available. Okay, good. Well, I'd love to talk about it. All right. So there's actually an interactive website, but it's still a work in progress. So I'm not really, if you want to look at it, talk to me. The main thing, I guess, the last thing I want to say is We have a lot of different programs. We have CCAP, ELS, Head Start, Pre-K, and I think it's useful to think about them along these dimensions. So what ages are served? What income levels are served? What service providers are eligible to get funding through that stream? And what quality assurance is there built into that program? Because quality assurance is very important, and you can subsidize low quality care, and the family ends up better off, but the kid does not end up better off. The family has more leisure time, but the kids come out with worse scores. All right, I have 20 seconds left. Early experiences have lifelong consequences, and we need to think about these early years as a scarce investment opportunity and not as a burden. We don't ever get those years back, and we need to make sure that we invest when we can, because we can't later, or it gets more expensive later. The second thing is we ask the most of families when they have the least, and then we get this whole series of crises, and they're entirely predictable if you think about it, and you look at the data, and yet, I don't know, we sort of, good luck, we're happy with the way things are, or not. And better analysis can hopefully improve decisions about where to invest. Thank you.
I wish I could study I can't even pronounce it, economics with you. It's just fabulous. Thank you. And thank you all. I just want to announce we have an adjusted schedule since we started 10 minutes late. We're going to take our break at 10:15, and then we will reconvene at 10:35. But right now we're going to take Q&A for about 10 minutes. So who's our microphoner? Right here. Okay, so raise your hand if you've got a question, and we'll turn it over now to Aaron Sojourner.
I'm wondering if in presenting to the White House of both Barack Obama and the early part of Trump's administration, if you provided or if you have charts that show that juxtapose Europe and the countries of Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany and France, and somewhat differently is Northern Italy because it's municipalities. And it seems like their direction has been that children are the future and have made a lot of early investments, and I'm just wondering if you have the possibility of having a chart or making a few comments about that difference in national direction.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a global economy, and American and Minnesota workers are competing globally nowadays, and we're not competing. We want to be, I think the key to Minnesota's success has been our productive workforce and our, good education system. And if you want to produce as cheaply as possible, you probably should go somewhere else. But if you want to drive innovation, if you want to come up with the next new product, the next new innovation in productive technology or whatever, medical devices, retail, this is the place for you. And that is premised on the idea that we have a skilled workforce, a big, highly educated, highly productive workforce. That is the key to our economic success globally, and that's the key to our success of our communities. So I think it's valuable to look around the world and see who our competitors in this space are and what are they doing. And as you say, we're dead last. If you look at advanced countries, the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has looked across countries to rank investments in early childhood care and education, and we're not dead last. We're like third from last out of 35 or something. So, but we're pretty shamefully low. I have had the chance. I worked with Ivanka Trump's team pretty closely on these priorities because they were very interested in them. And I think arguments about our communities here carry more weight often than arguments about we should do what Europe does. There's this national, pride. But, I think if you can shift it to the competitive frame, like we're competing in a global economy against those nations, and we want our workers to be productive and succeed, then that, I think that's a useful way to use that, and just a useful way to think about it.
I have a question. In light of the racial disparities in the various sectors, is this, or do you plan on breaking this out in racial categories?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. I didn't show it to you now, but the last bit of work we're doing where we're measuring access to ECE services across Minnesota communities, we are building it in a way that you'll be able to measure differences by racial and ethnic group, differences by family income, as well as differences across geography and across time. So, so that's one thing. If you look at you remember I showed you the evidence from that experiment where kids were randomly assigned to have access to this high quality care environment. They didn't all take it, but just even including the ones that didn't take it are the results I showed you. And what we see, I showed you that there were massively different effects based on family income. But if you look by race, controlling for income, there are no differences. I mean, the effects, it's a human thing. There's not a different effect of ECE by race once you control for income. This is something that benefits, early experiences matter for every child. Now, there are very strong relationships, terrible relationships between race and income and family wealth. And so that's what generates, these differences. The kids have different experiences. And the way to close that is to close the gap in their opportunities, close the gap in their experiences. And we can do that. There's many different ways to do that.
Hi. You mentioned the importance of quality in making our public investments.
Yeah.
Early returns on QRIS, the quality rating systems like Parent Aware, are showing I think we can't really define quality as definitively as we'd like, and that we're still in the process of making sure we're getting it right on that front. So given that we're not investing enough, that we have these access problems, and we're still figuring out quality in the short term, where do we put our resources now as we start to hopefully close that gap?
That's a great question. So I was told I'm not supposed to delve into policy recommendations, and I'm going to respect that, but I'm happy to. Okay. So I don't have a super strong set of recommendations that I'm pushing. But I do agree with your point that right now we don't have quality measurement nailed. I think we have the QRIS system. It's probably better than not having a QRIS system. But the evidence in general that QRIS systems across many states are strongly measuring something that predicts kids' learning gains, it's not strong. The evidence is not strong. And even in Minnesota, there's a little bit of evidence, but it's not strong. And I think we need to invest in improving and validating and just learning how to do a better job. And that means investing in continuous improvement and systematic feedback, research. So, like, I think we spend a lot of money on a lot of stuff that doesn't have good evidence behind it. And, there's very strong evidence in general in this area, better than almost anything else. So I'm pretty comfortable saying, like, if I'm a decision maker and I'm trying to decide where to put money, like, I'm going to try to put it here, and then let's figure out how to do that. And let's use the best information available to us, and it's not perfect, and we should recognize that it's not perfect, and we shouldn't, we need to invest in improving it as well as doing it. So that's what I'll say.
Did the White House report suggest particular financing innovations that could actually infuse resources into this grossly underfinanced public sector? And secondly, were there workforce-related recommendations in the White House report?
So there are a lot of financing mechanisms available. I think the fundamental problem is a lack of political will, and maybe a lack of understanding of the facts and the evidence, and those are connected. So that report talks about the Obama administration's preferred solutions, which were, they invested in preschool development grants and Head Start, and they raised quality standards in the the federal version of CCAP, CCDF, and so it talked about those kinds of things. There's talk about social impact bonds and these kinds of more creative, unusual financing mechanisms. But look, we believe that roads help the economy, and it's valuable to generate revenue to finance investments in roads. They're separable issues. It's a separate issue. How do you raise the monies over here, and how do you use the money is over here? They don't need to be connected. If we have good investments, we should find the way to make them, and we should think about the most efficient ways and equitable ways to do that. But they don't have to be connected. That's me as an economist, but I'm sure the politicians will tell you that it's harder than that, and I'm sure they're right. Thank you.
So this politician definitely agrees with that economist. So thank you. So I also want to make sure to acknowledge Senator Melissa Wickland is here as well, and has been just a big supporter of this. I assume that she may have to leave, as Senator Ralph will need to in a little bit, because the Senate is going to be in session pretty soon. Want to make sure to acknowledge her support. So we are now on break until 10:35, despite what the slide will say. And so for our folks watching at home, please join us in a little bit, or wherever you're watching us from. And thanks so much, everybody. Talk soon.
Close to it. We'll keep nudging each other out of the way. Get in front of that. I'm sorry your name didn't get on there. It seemed like it got there in time.
And they didn't change the name of the workforce study. Remember, we had talked about what name should we use, and that didn't get changed either.
Okay.
Okay, it's 10:35. 10:35. Time to reconvene. And we're going to just grab your coffee, shake the last hand, and we'll start. Dave, do you want to, with your low voice?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Kelly's going to go first? Kelly. Kelly is? Sorry. Kelly Harder's going to go first? We're going to just go in the same order, though. Okay, so we're back on. Hello to our friends on the webcast. I do want to make sure to acknowledge another colleague from the legislature who's here, Representative Roz Peterson. Representative Peterson, can you stand? I'm not quite sure where you went. There she is in the back. Yep, thank you. So we actually have representatives from all four legislative caucuses who've been here. So excellent, coming together. And I also just wanted to point out that first presentation by Aaron Sojourner, you might have seen on the agenda, it says fundamentals, and then the description there. Our planning team has really been trying to help lay the groundwork for an understanding of early childhood policy, to say, what would it be irresponsible for someone who works in advocacy in this area to not know? And to lay out a series of fundamental, a set of knowledge for folks to have. And so that presentation by Aaron was kind of part of the series that we've been having. So now we pivot to hearing about a couple of particular projects and initiatives. And so as you can see in the agenda, we next have information about this early childhood workforce study. So please join me in welcoming Krista and also Debbie from Department of Education.
All right, welcome back from break. Thank you for having us here today. Again, my name is Krista Anders, and this is my colleague, Debbie Hewitt from the Minnesota Department of Education. We help lead Minnesota's statewide team that's working to transform the early childhood workforce. And so we're gonna spend about 10 minutes talking about our work and hope to have about 5 minutes for questions. So write down your questions as we go through this.
Erin did a great job setting up the reasons that the early childhood workforce is so important. We know so much about the science of child development, and that one of the essential factors in getting the results that we want for young children is having a well-prepared teacher or provider working with them. Unfortunately, the qualifications for providers has not kept up with what we know about the science, and so we are looking at rectifying that with some additional plans. Here's what we know about the current workforce. We know that many of us are aging out with fewer people entering the field. We know that our workforce across the state lacks diversity, and that the diversity we do have doesn't necessarily reflect the children in the communities. We know that many of the providers are poorly prepared to work with children of diverse backgrounds and languages and abilities. We know that the workforce is very poorly compensated, that the median hourly rate is $10.81 an hour. And therefore, Minnesota ends up spending about $43 million on public supports for those early childhood providers. We know that turnover rates are high, and that some of our higher education courses are shutting down because they can't justify that people will come out of their courses with a degree that'll earn them a living wage. And we know that about 10% of family child care providers and 38% of center teachers have a BA.
Okay, so this is the report trilogy from the national academies that we've been working with. So our work is highly informed by and aligned with these publications. They are nonpartisan, non-political consensus studies reflecting the best thought and uniform agreement of national experts. So we started with transforming the workforce, which is the one on the far left. That report came out in 2015. It's a 600-page book. I left it over there at my table. Lori will hold it up. It's huge. The first 300 pages alone are on child development and how important it is. It does have, it has 13 recommendations, which are all policy-based, and it has a clear call for having lead teachers eventually have a bachelor's degree in a child-related field. The second publication, promoting the educational success of children and youth learning English, is about children who are learning a language in addition to English. Obviously, there are growing numbers in the country, growing numbers in Minnesota. The clear call here is that teachers who are working with students who are learning 2 languages need to have the skills and competencies in order to do so. According to this book, that means they need to have at least a bachelor's degree with specialized coursework. We know that in Minnesota, many of our institutes of higher ed don't have that coursework developed right now to really teach how do you teach students who have multiple languages. And then the final report is so new that it has this really ugly cover. This one is called Transforming Financing of Early Care and Education, and it just came out in February 2018. All of these reports are available online, and you can also purchase them from the National Academy. If you purchase that third report, it still says, you know, this is just a proof, and it's full of typos, which tells you how new it is. And it's the information that Erin talked about just prior to this lines up directly with this report. It talks both about financing the family level, like what does it take for us to support those families who have the least, and what does it take to support the workforce. And I think it behooves all of us who are advocates to go get that report and read it, because it really has the policy recommendations in there about what the next steps are to do what we know needs to be done.
At the same time as Minnesota started working on transforming the workforce, we were fortunate enough to receive a grant from the National Governors Association to look at opportunities to improve compensation. And that was an opportunity to pull people together who don't usually talk about early childhood, like labor and industry, economic and employee development, human rights, institutes of higher ed, and we had about 18 months to talk about recommendations that we would send to the Children's Cabinet and to the governor. And a number of recommendations came out. One is to look at tax credits for both programs and for individuals in the field. We need to continue to provide scholarships and bonuses for those who are working to obtain their education, and once they obtain that, to retain them. We want to increase funding for business education and coaching and training. It's important that we connect compensation to quality efforts. We want to look at a wage ladder, where as you increase your education, you would increase the income level. We need to continue to encourage businesses to provide programs for their employees, and we want to continue to raise the importance of the early childhood workforce and how it affects the state's economy. And then we're going to collaborate to work with the B8 group in the transforming the workforce.
So at the same time that we had the work going on with the National Governors Association group, we've had this group working with the national academies. We call this our B8 group, referencing birth to 8. And so we have had funding from the McKnight Foundation and West Central Initiative to do this statewide plan. And our goal is to create a 10-year plan looking at implementing some of those 13 recommendations. We have had a broader advisory council called the P3 Design Team.
As part of our work, we were asked to choose 2, maybe 3 priority items out of the 13 recommendations that the national report put. Well, Minnesota decided that we were going to be overachievers, and we came up with 5 priority areas that we thought were absolutely essential. The first is that we need to support and enhance institutes of higher ed so that they create a unified system. There's been a lot that's been done on transfer pathways with the Minnesota State colleges and universities and the articulation agreements, but more needs to be done there to implement that pathway. We need to make sure that early childhood programs are remaining in operation and that they teach the things that we want our teacher candidates to have when they graduate. Another priority area is that we have increased access to high quality early childhood field placements and induction programs. Our faculty are telling us that it's really challenging to find high quality programs to send students to, and that sometimes, you know, a cooperating teacher can be a great teacher, but not necessarily of college students. And so to give them supports and resources to do some professional development around that. We also want to create pathways for individuals to advance their educational level and their career to the extent that they want to. So we know that the BA was required at the national level. In Minnesota, we felt we had some preparation work that needed to be done. And so supporting the institutes of higher ed and supporting individuals to continue their educational pursuits are among that pre-work. So we want to ensure that people have access to institutes of higher ed, that we offer incentives that are meaningful to individuals, and that we recruit and retain not only more people to the field, but more diverse people. We also know that we need to work on data. We collect a lot, but it doesn't always talk to each other, and we're not always comparing apples to oranges. And we know that we need to make sure that some group or individual or agency is responsible for this work, or it'll be kind of like, come on over for coffee sometime, and coffee never happens.
So what's next? We have had a period where we've been asking for input through an electronic survey, and thanks for those of you who responded. We've had 268 responses to the survey, so we're busy breaking out into subcommittee, and again, thanks to those of you in the room who are participating on a subcommittee. We're trying to incorporate the data into our plan. We're hoping to take it out on the road this summer and do some more focus groups with direct stakeholders, particularly child care providers themselves. And we are partnering with MNEP, the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership, to figure out how we can support diverse candidates in the early childhood field. So we're interested in your thoughts and ideas, and you can find out a whole ton more on our website, which is ecworkforcemn.org, so earlychildhoodworkforceminnesota.org, and you should like us on Facebook.
And one last thing that we want to be sure that people hear, it is a quote from Transforming the Workforce: "A concerted effort focused on these adults represents one of the most important opportunities available for improving the quality of care and education received by young children and ultimately improving the outcome."
We can take one question. Rob? Pressure. pressure's on.
Okay, see how I do. So the comparing BA versus 2 years with good coaching. A lot of resources can be put into a BA, and in the workforce, if we had, less expense around that 2 year with a good coaching wraparound, what does the research talk about results from those two pathways?
Good question. We'll have to get back to you. I should say that the financing report says that for those existing professionals, so everybody who's right now providing childcare, their higher education needs to be 100% supported. So it says right now it would just say, if you've got an AA and you're working, somehow the public has to support you in advancing however you want. And it says then for new incoming students, it has to be much less expensive than it currently is. So I haven't seen studies comparing those two things, but I'll look and see. I'll get back to you.
And I just want to thank some of the people who are in the audience today who have been doing the work on workforce for many years, and we know we're building on your efforts, so thank you for that.
Thank you. That was excellent. And a reminder, we can still comment on your plan. So, all right. At this moment, I'd like to invite Kelly Harder forward from Dakota County, and we're going to give Kelly a few extra minutes here. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So, all right. I'm going to put my timer on because I have about 45-minute presentation to do in 10 minutes, and I can do this. I want to first off thank the elected officials on the Senate and the House side for putting forth the extra effort, and that they're not sitting, they're working up there, but they're engaging the community. There is no more important area to invest in our system than our youth. This isn't just a heartfelt concept or an academically proven reality. This we know as a system. I'm a community services director in Dakota County. What does that mean? So I have 930 staff. I have all of corrections. I have all of public health. I have all of social services from the womb to the tomb, everything that comes in between. All the eligibility programs, child support, workforce investment board, TANF, veteran services, and extension. So if you want to know how important, come sit in my office, because when we don't get it right as a system on the early years, they come visit my programs on the later years. The difference between someone graduating from high school or not in their out years is over $336,000 of publicly funded programs throughout their lifetime. So if there's anything to a policymaker that should make sense to invest in, is we should have every youth be a graduate at all costs. Because the cost of not getting them there is greater than what the public dollar is of getting them there. So about 5 years ago, I had the opportunity, I was out at a summit, happened to be out in Cambridge. No offense here, I gotta watch out for I know I'm at a great academic institution. But so I'm at Harvard, I'm sitting with 79 of the nations and some of the world's thought leaders around housing, health, and human services. The president's office comes in and says, I want to do 10 initiatives over 10 years in 10 communities that will move the dial in generational poverty. Since we've done research in 40 years, we've never moved the dial in generational poverty. We've done great things, but how in 40 years haven't we done this, right? So we break off independently, randomly, 12 of us, 12 groups. 10 of the 12 groups come back, had met privately, come back and said, we don't want another program, we don't need more money. We need to get every kid reading at third grade proficiency because it has a 90+% trajectory toward whether they're going to graduate or not. Let's just do that. Let's organize our system so education is working, prenatal, our family home visitings are working with our quality child care, who are working with Head Start, who are working with WIC, who are working with school readiness, who are working with education to get the kids there. What the problem with all of that is, it's all independent. And we mapped, I came back home and I said, I got my hand on every one of those levers. I have no excuse. We have every program. And I said, if not in Dakota County, then where? And if not us, then who? So I started meeting with our superintendents, 4 of them, who are change agents and innovative and not saying, well, we do education, you do that, and us saying, well, we do this, you do that. We said we all believe in families, we believe in our communities. And to get us there, we said we're going to get every kid to reading. So we're courageous or crazy enough to say we're going to have every kid eventually in Dakota County. We're starting Tier 1 with kids who are in our WIC program, kids who are in family home visiting, and early language learners. Why that? Because that's what the data suggests are the ones who struggled most getting to 3rd grade reading proficiency. And so we want 100% of our identified participants who meet where they're going to meet the state proficiency. Here's our pilot group, phase 1, tier 1. It will officially be launching January 1 of 19. We've been at it over 3 years. And you all know this, I'm gonna blow through this, but if any of the policymakers or any of you need reconvincing why we should be investing, we have the economists here, talk about what are the return on investments when we get a public dollar here, what's the high ROI? There probably is no higher statistical ROI to invest in than this. You know what isn't on there? Jails. You know what else isn't on there? Deep and other TANF type welfare to work type programs, because welfare to work doesn't work. Career to work, right? We want careers, not just work. There's a wage gap that you have to be addressing. And so we could map our programs that address this population levels, and it's easy, it's that simple, and yet it's that complicated, I understand. We all know this, right? If that's not enough from an economic standpoint, let's look at the neurology, let's look at the brain development. This is what we know. It's why Minnesota has been so aggressive into their credit with family home visiting programs and making sure that they're being funded, that we're doing with quality child care, Head Starts, WIC. Minnesota's in a great position compared to other states. We got to make sure as a system we're working together. How is it I can be 100% successful against all my programs, and yet the consumers are failing on the other end? It's because we're not attending to the system. This is the last one, as if there's not enough, right, with the brain development. So it doesn't take long once you see all of that so what are we doing about this? So in Dakota County, all the work we do, I went in front of the board as I have 933 staff, $120 million, and we present a budget through social determinants of health. We're talking less about programs and departments and more about if we're going to have a thriving county, we're going to have a thriving state, we have to be attending to every one of those dimensions. You can have the world-class education. I hear this all the time. We're going to be world-class education, yet we don't have affordable, sustainable, safe housing options. You can't have both and have a thriving community. You can't lack public affordable transportation and have a world-class education, right? You can't have world-class transportation, housing, health and wellness, everyone health care if our education systems, and you can't have good education if we don't start at birth or child care, and this is a systems issue. So the beauty of this is it allows cities to understand what role they play, school boards to understand what they play, county, state. It allows the bureaucrats to understand, I mean that respectfully, what swim lane they can play in, and then what we have to do is what are the right indicators, and then what is the data underneath, and how do we commit ourselves to that path. This Birth to 8 clearly addresses the swim lane in that education space. But we can't get there if we aren't attending to health and wellness. Minnesota, if you are poor and you have or do not have medical assistance or health care coverage, is the difference of the haves and the have-nots to support services that may come into your personal and or your family life. And obviously, we're not getting anywhere. And if we want to address our economic stability in the long term, this is what we have to be addressing. And so what we're doing in our Birth to 8 initiative, we look across those, and the key here, these are the life domain areas that you have to look across in social determinants. We assess each and every family in a status by each domain if they're at anything below safe, and we want them to be at stable to thriving. So we have a sponsor group, and we have the superintendents, not their proxies. These superintendents have been to each and every one of the meetings from South St. Paul, West St. Paul, Burnsville, and Inver Grove. And we've also then have our nonprofit partners who are at the table. Here's the key. This is 99% of it. Does this thing have a little, you guys can't see that laser. So here's what we created. We mapped every program publicly funded from school age and publicly and social services that touches a family's life from pre-birth to age 8, I quit counting at 32 publicly funded programs. Not one of those programs inherently transfer the value they bring to that individual or family's life to the next service delivery system. Family home visiting. I said to our family home visiting, Dakota, the first county to do family home visiting in the state of Minnesota over 15 years ago. I said to my public health director, how many kids are reading to proficiency in 3rd grade? Answer, we have no idea. We close them when they go into kindergarten. Shame on us. So then we go to the school, and they're like, well, we do all these early childhood screenings, but we're not working with the WIC, and we can't work, and some of it's because of data, and some of it's enough of the excuses. Let's map it. So you have well over 32. We have some investment in our infrastructure, but no one's managing the system. This initiative is about systems management and systems intentionality. And what you can't see, but I hope you can, is what we've built is there are 5 essential developmental milestones that are going to be measured for every child in Dakota County in that target population. At birth, we are going to measure their weight, how old was the parent when they had the child, if they're single or not, and if they're on public assistance. So you can see in the black underneath at birth, and then in the red are the measures that are going to go at each one of them. So you can take the red, and at 3 to 4, they're going to have the school district's going to do early childhood screening and those red factors. Every measure is backed by academic. It is proven unequivocally that has a direct correlation of parents' age, whether they're both parents are in the home or not, and has a direct correlation to reading on 3rd grade proficiency. Every one of them. And so we're building a database right now. We had appropriation from the legislature. We're partnering with 2 other communities, and we will enroll the kids. And at birth, we right now, and I'll show it to you, have an ability at birth to have a diagnostic probability of whether there are risk factors that will get in the way of their reading at 3rd grade proficiency. Not everyone's coming in at birth. So then if they come in and they move in and they're at kindergarten assessment, and what we'll ultimately have is a red, yellow, or green. It will say they're on track, there's a warning, or all hands on deck. And so what it says then is a system, slow down, make sure we have the right depth, the right service, and the right amount at that family as they're willing and as they wish. It's voluntary, so as we can address this. So we've built an algorithm on the back end by our staff. So this is an example of the type of questions. They're weighted scores. So what we did is we did a stress test in Dakota County. Great concept, wonderful idea, does it even work? So we tested in January of 17, 535 births. And of the 535 births, we can see which of them are green by what questions, which ones are yellow, which ones are red. So we knew of those 535, 376, is that the number? Were green. They're all on track based on those metrics of development, so we're good to go. We have 88 yellow and 70 yellow and 88 red. As a system, we're going to peel back which ones are red, what are yellow. Is the school involved? Do we know who they are? We can do an intentional reach out in the community, work with our community-based partners. And so then we can go through that. And then what we did is we just have also checked every one of, and this is state data as compared to other algorithm we built, so that we can look at 3rd grade reading proficiency. And so we're tracking the data. So you look at the parents, the mom's education is a direct correlation to the child's education. And none of this is new research. What it is system intentionality to say, let's not blindly walk through life here as a system and know that this data, this research, this evidence is out there. And when it's present in a family's life, let's as a system be able to transactionally do something about it. So we looked at this and we validated our metrics around it. Here we're an example of the data. When we looked at maternal age, that was a variable. I mean, I can't change the parent's age, right? If it's red because the parent's 20, that doesn't mean we go age the parent and put the baby back. I mean, we can't do that. So what it does mean is let's just be aware. And yellow doesn't mean there's wrong and there isn't blame in this. It's just to say, is the system intentional and is the system aware? The system being our community partners, education, and the county itself. So we've got some funding. We've won more awards of potential innovation around this. I said, boy, we better make sure it works. It is going to work. We're pretty proud of that. The other thing I would say in conclusion, it has transformed. We're the first Department of Public Health who now, part of our WIC intake, requires a release of information, a consent to the school districts. The thing that kills these schools is when the surprises show up. South St. Paul gets 200 kids at the beginning of the school year. Of a 600 classroom, 200, they've never done a screening. They didn't even know they existed. We did WIC and we did consent, working through our county attorneys and data. We found 140 of them in 35 days. Just by systems working together more intentionally. And so we're real excited about that, and others are picking that up. And so we're looking at a systems approach to make sure we get every kid we can. Schools now are going, why do we all have a different early childhood screening tool? I think they can choose one of 4. Our school districts are saying, let's all choose one, because that gives us higher data, quality data. Our school districts are now working differently together than they ever have, and now they're also saying, between West St. Paul, South St. Paul, and Inver Grove, have said, all right, we got them to 3rd grade, now let's get that career intentionality, career and college readiness, and they've already started an initiative about open campus. They all don't have to replicate advanced classes in the classroom, so they're doing open campus transportation so kids from one district can go to the other one to take in those classes. This is good systems reform. It's great intentionality. We thank the legislature for their belief and support. I hope I can come back next year, and that we all can. We're going to build this tool so it's translatable and scalable for the whole state of Minnesota. Eventually, we'll carry the weight to get it to work, and we owe it to the citizens. We owe it to our families, and we owe it for everyone, because we need a workforce. But when we have a workforce, the propensity to be drawing down public dollar costs on the other side, which is the other part of the system I operate, is directly correlated to that. So with that, I'll stand for any questions. Sorry to be in auctioneer mode at you, but I am at auctioneer mode at you.
Thank you for this presentation. It was fascinating. My question is, what is the framework or process that you all used to get to the 5 goals that you're measuring?
So under our executive council, obviously, you know, we show up and wear these suits and talk about what we're doing, and we know it's the staff and the leaders within the operational level. So school designated and identified key staff at the school, their early learning, supervisor leadership. So I had my child welfare staff, public health staff, early childhood staff. The school brought 3 to 5 of theirs, and we had community-based organizations had their talent. They came together really as an active steering group that did the work themselves. And we also were fortunate to have underwriting for a project manager who helped keep the work going in between, whereby which we started. What research is out there that has a direct correlation to reading? And we just started dumping the data and churning it and churning it and churning it, and using the data to drive where we went. Feel very confident. The one thing I will tell you that I've been pushing back at everybody, and I'm getting plenty of pushback as well, and there's reasons for this, but you'll see it eventually evolve in there too, is having the ACEs scores should be another key piece that needs to be part of that as well. So we're aware of it. The thing is, we get those ACEs scores. If they're involved in those parts of our system, our WIC and our family home visiting, there's other ways we can get that as well.
I'd just like to say congratulations and actually seeing that there's a need for systems change, because that's the only way we're really going to make a difference.
Yeah, I want to put an exclamation point on that, and thank you for it. I think as a collective, right, education, social services, corrections, civil education, these systems are all wonderful. We live in a great state that has just some phenomenal departments and programs and professional industry. You could ask, how is it we continue to fail our residents? And I always say this, think of criminal justice. Law enforcement by the city. You have a sheriff's jail by elected official at the sheriff. You have prosecuting attorney, elected official. You have defense attorneys by county. The state court runs the judges, right? And then you have corrections by the county. How is it all of those programs are doing 100% what's being asked of them, and yet we're failing the person that goes through the system? Who's responsible for the system to work or not? Who's responsible for education? Not just schools. I have to make sure there's affordable, sustainable housing. We got to make sure there's thriving in that home, and that's why we like these social determinants. So what I say is, if not us, then who? Meaning at the county. The state isn't going to do it. I mean, in all due respect, the state has a role to play at policy. I have a role to play in implementation and practice. And the feds aren't going to fix our problem. Let's not hold our breath to hope that comes down in any solution, because it hasn't in decades. And they mean well, and they do good stuff. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a blame. But if we don't locally take on the ownership of resolving this, and let me say finally, with all of you in the room, The most significant and I think most important transactional and transformational thing that can be happening is you, the citizens, and you, the community, stand up, rise up, and have a voice around this stuff. Because I'm just a talking bureaucrat, right? When I show up at the legislature, oh, here comes that social service director. But when you all show up, that's a different story. And that's where you see transformation happen. It's what makes Minnesota such a beautiful place.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Mary Jo McGuire, Ramsey County Commissioner. And we love the county work, and we know that counties have a huge role in this, and we've got a continuum of care, systems-wide look going on that we're, trying to figure out how do we most impact this really important issue. So we're getting, legislation to get data sharing, or we're getting public administration permission for data sharing. Can you talk a little bit about what you got some legislative funding to help with this? So arguably we all know that we save a lot of money, but we need some money maybe to start out, or what did you get legislative funding to do? And was that a grant, or how did that come forward?
Yep. So initially when we built out the original specs of just the project itself, we were fortunate. We went to some foundations. Another great thing about the state, we have a few foundations. We brought them, pitched a few places. I hit the road. Had plenty of no's, but thought it was the right thing and finally got a yes. And so having that project manager really helped move us to define the specs of what the program would be. Went to the legislature specifically for funding to build the technology. Because ultimately this is going to be a software platform that the data of each of those measurable milestones is going to have a student's identifier. So here's the other fun thing in this. So every student, how do you have a common identifier in all those systems? Well, guess what every student gets when they enter kindergarten? A MARS number, which is an education identifying number. You know what we said? Let's give it to them at birth. And then we have a common identifier, except that we could never get an answer from the state to say we could do that. And so then I just asked a different way. Is there any law that prohibits me from doing it? Not so much I want permission to do it. And eventually we talked to the governor's office, and we got the commissioner to say that's between you and the school districts. And so it's a way by which then we went to the legislature. We got an appropriation specific for the technology build that will track, ideally at birth, but anywhere they come along, it will have only a child's name and the family, child's name, date of birth, address, zip code, those type of things. And then the information that sits in it is only going to be red, yellow, or green, and it has the score. It will not be confidential data or any vertical information, as I call it, that's tied to HIPAA or tied to confidentiality. It merely is going to roll along. The point is, this is about a system. This is not a case management. It's not to replace current state systems. This is for a systems progress accountability technology solution. And so the legislature gave us that with some accountability to report back. We involved 3 other communities, to which we have the other 2. Like I said, we'll be implementing January 1. Our hope is that we get this to work well enough that, if it's something Ramsey County's interested in, Commissioner, please have at it. They don't even necessarily have to wait for permission, but we'll get the IT built out. We're just finishing specs and should be up and have it all done and tested by the end of this year for prime time January 1. Okay, thank you again. Oh, you have one more question. Sorry. Okay, they're cutting you off.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'll come over there, though. Okay, thank you all for all the work you're doing. Appreciate it.
That was great. Thank you so much. That was marvelous. At this time, we're going to call up all of the coalitions that are on our list, Voices and Choices, Minnesota Futures, so forth. So come on down, and we're going to start with Kelly Monson to talk about the Minnesota Children's Cabinet first, so just so we're kind of reversing the order. And she knows she's not a coalition, but she is a force. So anyway, I just want to thank Kelly Harder. That was an excellent, inspiring mission. So we will move the dial. Do you want me up here or here? Why don't you sit over here? I should just indicate that Cindy Yang and Tracy Roloff are both unable to be here, so that's why we're moving into the coalition. So, okay.
We don't think so. Oh, we are on. We're always on. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Like Jane said, I'm Kelly Munson, Executive Director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet. And while we're not a typical coalition like my friends up here, but we are a coalition of agencies. And for those of you who don't know, what makes up the Children's Cabinet is education, health, and human services. And then in January of this year, the governor expanded the Children's Cabinet to add the Met Council, Department of Transportation, Department of Employment and Economic Development, and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And the reason we did that is because we realized while we have programs for children, we're not going to see outcomes unless we start addressing the whole family and issues of the whole family, such as housing, transportation, nutrition, food, things like that. Right now, we have 3 core strategies that we use for the Children's Cabinet. We do not administer any programs. We leave that for the very smart people in the agencies. But what we do is we spend time out in communities, talking with folks, building a transformative vision, advising the governor on different policy issues, as well as where I would say we'd spend a lot of our time, and I'm going to refer to this slide up here, and have been spending a lot of our time, is around coordination and collaboration across agencies. A lot of times we talk about programs, and that's great, but you all don't get to see what happens behind the scenes with the cabinet and how much time we spend doing this work. And so right now we are helping to lead the Early Childhood Systems Reform Project. We also staff our Early Learning Council, which makes recommendations to the governor and legislature. Our Help Me, our Help Me Grow initiative, which is really moving upstream to provide access and services to support healthy development of children, with also a whole family approach to make sure families' needs are met as well. You heard about our early childhood workforce work earlier. We also are working on a NGA grant, a National Governors Association grant, around the Two-Generation Policy Network. And then finally, I'm just going to talk really briefly about Results for Children and Youth. This is a group that had been coming together the last couple years. Senator Smith actually was bringing this group together to work on world's best workforce and how can we get there. There was a legislation for the school districts around this, and she started thinking, it takes more than just our education initiatives. And so she brought all of these agencies together, Minnesota Management Budget, Department of Education, Human Services, Health, DEED, and Housing, and we also now have added our other agencies at Met Council and Department of Transportation. And Office of Higher Education, while they are not an official part of the Children's Cabinet, they are an adopted part of the Children's Cabinet, because obviously we need to have access to higher education and post-secondary for families to support them. And this group, this has now turned into the Children's Cabinet meetings. This group meets every other month. We are talking about things like data, braiding and blending funding, how do we move this work forward, and it's great to see that these commissioners coming together and recognizing how transportation plays a role in, say, DEED and building and their child care access grants. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. I'm trying to get it done really, really quick. But I just want you to know that we are definitely aware that there is a change in administration coming, and I want you to know that we are working tirelessly to make sure that this work is sustainable and that this work continues into the next administration, and working on lots of strategies around that. Feel free to connect with me. I'm getting the time signal, happy to talk further about the cabinet, but I'm gonna stop now. Turn it to Claire.
This one's on. I'm guessing the slides in the presentation are in order of the people on the... Oh, there's a lot of... Okay. So do we want to go in order of the slides? Okay.
Okay, want me to go next? Okay.
I give you Diane Halsey.
Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Halsey, and I'm the chair of Voices and Choices for Children Coalition. We are staffed by CDF, Children's Defense Fund. We just wanted to give a quick updates on what is going on with our coalition. Oh, I knew I was going to do that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this year, our main legislative priority has been our own bill that we have led on, the Community Solutions Fund. This is our second year that we have led on this bill. Unfortunately, we did not get a hearing this year, but we felt like we did a lot of education around this particular bill. The purpose of it is we are working with the Department of Health on creating a fund that would be accessed by communities of color throughout the state of Minnesota. And one reason why we think it's been a little bit difficult is the way that it is structured is a different way of giving out money, because we are allowing communities to define what their health issues are and then determine what the solutions are. And that's different. It's really different from where we usually, the state will say, this is the issue we want to address, and can you address it? So we're doing a lot of education with legislators around how we might be able to give out money differently. In addition to that, we've been supporting on the child care assistance program. There's been some family-friendly provisions that have been included in the governor's bill or governor's budget, which we're really excited about. We've also done a lot of administrative state agency work. We've been working with many of the initiatives that have been mentioned already today. We've been working really closely with Department of Human Services. There's several of us that sit on the early childhood systems reform work. We also have been working with the Birth to 8 and Coalition, and we've also been advising DHS on the plan that they are preparing to the feds for the Child Care Development Block Grant. In addition to that, this year we have started our first equity blog. We're blogging basically around educating about what is equity, especially in the space of early childhood. How do we define that? We started it in January. We'd love to get it out. So if you have places where that we can post or share, please let us know. Lastly, I want to mention that we also, a number of us, through a generous donation through Blue Cross Blue Shield, we just returned like Friday, barely, from Chicago from the Policy Link Equity Conference. There's a group of us that attended. It's a national conference on equity. We're really pleased to go because we learned a ton. You'll be seeing, as we blog about it, you'll be seeing some of the things that we've learned, and we got really fired up to continue to do this work. And I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know how to, okay, there we go. Yeah, I'll just mention that May Loso is our senior organizer at CDF. She was not able to be here, but she is the person that you can help reach out to for more information on any of this.
All right, thank you, Diane. On to Minnesota's future. There we go. You can read them. That's who we are. It's a group of people and organizations that get together and try not to get in each other's way, basically. We don't sponsor any legislation or anything kind of out front like that, but we try on the back end to really work together to make sure we're moving systems and our own organizations toward the same principles. And those principles are those right up there. And I'll let you read those too. The one thing we do sort of offer concretely is that the first Tuesday of each month, October to June, we sponsor Policy Hour, which is held at Think Small in Minneapolis. It's a lunch and learn. It's free for anyone in the community who wants to come, and we invite speakers every month on early childhood or out-of-school time topics. And it's on Facebook if you can't get there. We've had a lot of that this year. All right, so what are we tracking at the legislature this year? Trying not to steal thunder from anyone else. I know someone else will probably many minds will talk about early learning scholarships. The one thing I'd like to say about that is that with the governor proposing that they be available birth to 5 instead of just to high risk infants and toddlers as they are right now, that change would delete language that currently requires that siblings who get scholarships have to attend the same program, and this is something very important to a lot of providers we've heard from, especially for infants and toddlers, because sometimes if a preschooler has a scholarship and the infant has a sibling scholarship, the preschool program might not even offer infant care. So they can't use the scholarship at a different program, and that's a problem. So we hope at least that language gets cleaned up. On child care assistance, I know Jessica will be talking about that. We're real involved in that. We have new federal money. So, oh my gosh, Minnesota, if we can't get something done this year, I'm really going to lose faith. I just got to say. We have new federal money. Got to do something about the rest of family friendly and rates. On voluntary pre-K, mixed delivery or no delivery, Governor Dayton has proposed to make School Readiness Plus permanent and to increase the voluntary pre-K funding year after year. We do have concerns about the mixed delivery or not that is happening in that program because in the birth to 5 model, particularly infants and toddlers, if you don't have enough preschoolers in community programs, the finances don't work. Rates are going to go way up for infants and toddlers or providers are going to close. There is a somewhat controversial bill, it's not a new idea, other states do this, to mandate that a certain percentage of any new money in those state pre-K programs is used with community-based providers to help address that and also give families choices. Early childhood workforce, you've heard amazing stuff so far today. There's so much work going on, it's spectacular. And to pull one thing out of that, multiple groups, the National Governors Association, the B8, they have recommended this package of tax credits that's very much like something Louisiana has done. And there's also a bill, it actually got a hearing in the House this year, to have a Minnesota version of those tax credits. And those tax credits would give additional resources to parents, to teachers, to directors, to family child care providers, to owners, to operators, to businesses who help support child care, and to people who put more money in to retain, to paraphrase Oprah, and you get a car, and you get a car. Like there's something for everyone in this bill. And finally, we're tracking, I don't believe there's a bill this year, but we're tracking, hopefully, a bill in the future, efforts going forward around infant and early childhood mental health consultants in Minnesota. That's really been shown to reduce expulsion and increase educational outcomes, particularly for children of color in early learning settings. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Who's next?
Good morning. I'm Laura LaCroix-DeLune, and I'm representing the Minnesota Targeted Home Visiting Coalition. I wanted to share with you our legislative goals this session, and they are to increase access and resources to targeted home visiting services and programs with increased funding, increased flexibility in how we're funding programs, which types of programs we're funding, and to protect the existing resources. Many of you may recall we were able to secure $12 million for fiscal year 17-18, or 18-19, and then for $33 million for fiscal year 2021. I'm happy to report before I go into session or bills this session. The Department of Health has released the grants. They haven't finalized the contract, so we can't tell you who got funded, but I do know that there were over $60 million in requests for the $15 million that were available. And for the first time, 13 nonprofits will be funded for home visiting services in the state. And then we had one tribe that was funded, and 34 to 36 different counties and cities receive funding for this. So we're excited to learn who got funded, and see who's going to be doing the good work. However, work's not done, and while I have you all with us, I'm hoping we can garner your support for House File 4113. Representative Krisha and Pinto here are leading our work in the House for increased resources for home visiting and to increase the flexibility of these resources. And Senator Rolfe, who was here with us earlier, and Wickland, who was here with us earlier, are carrying the Senate bill. we don't anticipate we're going to get additional resources, but we think it's absolutely important to keep that in front of legislators, that we want additional resources, that we know the demand far outweighs what resources are available. So we don't want to let up, but we do want to see an increase in flexibility. When the funding was passed 2 years ago, or last session, it feels like 2 years ago, last session, it was for evidence-based only programs, and these are model programs that have been identified by the federal government. We really would like to see at least up to 25% of these resources spent on innovative programs, more practice-based programs. We know that that all the models cannot serve different populations, and so we would like to see resources spent differently. This is an uphill battle. This is where we need your help. So whether you're online or in this room, please think about reaching out to Senator Benson and ask her to support Senate File 3635 and Representative Dean on 4113. So that's my plug. You'll see this language that we're trying to promote is also part of the Mini-Minds work. My colleague here will be talking about that in more depth. So you could also ask for them to support Senate File 3013 and House File 3328. I can make my pitches here, right? So we need your support to continue putting pressure on people to serve these important programs. And then in the last 23 seconds I have left, I would like to also make a push that we've been doing. We have some, I have the control of this. Sorry, people. I'm talking so fast. So I have control of these slides. Here are the bill numbers that we want your support on. And I'll talk about our policy language here because there's a couple important things we'd love you to be thinking about with us. The coalition is really trying to pay attention to how we might be able to access the social impact bonds that exist to help pay for home visiting services. So if anyone's interested in exploring that with us, please let us know. And then the final thing that we're trying to explore, it's the fourth policy position, is expanding Medicaid reimbursement for home visiting for paraprofessionals or community health workers. And there's some work that's been done on the infant mortality here in the state of Minnesota, really trying to increase who can get reimbursement. So we are working on that and hope to bring something forward in the 2019 session. So thank you for letting me go over. Sorry. All right.
Okay, let me see if I can talk as quickly as everybody else. You have to brace yourself for this. I'm Gertrude. I'm with First Students Finance, but I'm representing Mini-Minds. I'm on the executive committee for Mini-Minds. Our policy agenda for this year is basically quality, access, and economic development. Gotta do both. Okay. And so Mini-Minds continues to lead the efforts to fully fund early learning scholarships, and especially for 3- and 4-year-olds. And as a result of our efforts, 16,000 children are now being served. We think that's a huge success. Last year, we were able to expand scholarships to our most vulnerable children from birth to age 2, and we are hoping to increase that funding targeting at-risk infants and toddlers. We have also made significant progress in investing in home visiting services and hoping to basically increase the collaboration and coordination among the home visiting coordinators and early childhood providers to better serve families. We are hoping to gather consistent data on kindergarten readiness and allow schools to quickly assess and meet children's needs early on. Mini-Minds supports the funding of the implementation of a culturally and linguistically relevant statewide kindergarten entry profile. In addition, we also continue to lead efforts to grow parent aware across the state to support existing programs and identify a stable funding source to ensure its long-term sustainability. Okay, forget the slides. Mini-Minds has introduced 2 bills this session, Senate File 3013 and House File 3328. Thank you to our bill authors, Senator Justin Acorn and Representative Ron Krischer. We've had hearings in both the Senate, E12 Policy and Education Finance committees, and our bill is now laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Minimize also supports several important priorities, including CCDBG, conformity, and CCAP, also known as Child Care Assistance Program, which is a crucial need for many low-income families. We also know that these supports can only go as far as our child care workforce can support, and that's why Minimize is also supporting efforts to boost the number of qualified professionals across the state, whether it's through deed grants, tax credits, different types of incentives, or other efforts. We know it's going to take an all-of-the-above approach to build this infrastructure, and we will support continued efforts in addressing these needs. And so, before I conclude, we wanted to say a special thank you to those of you who joined us on March 29th for Advocacy for Children's Day. There were over 600 people in attendance. We welcomed hundreds of young children, parents, providers, community leaders, advocates, and legislators, and we are so grateful for your support. We also want to say thank you to our very important partners, the Greater United Way, ECFE, Head Start, and Minneapolis Future Coalition for hosting this important event. And although we've made significant progress in previous years, we are all in agreement that there's still much more to be done. We still have over 35 young children who are unable to access quality care and education, and that is of great concern to us. So I want to implore you to continue to stay engaged and to elevate the issue of early childhood and education. I just saw time, and I did it, yay! Whew. You cannot do it and manage the slides at the same time. It is impossible.
Okay. Hello. Is this on? I guess. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So I'm Jessica Anderson with Children's Defense Fund and also the Kids Can't Wait Coalition. And so I'll just briefly refresh your memory on kind of who we are and what we support, and then what we've done this session so far and where we're headed in these remaining 6 weeks or so. So the Kids Can't Wait Coalition supports basically 3 big things: increased funding for basic sliding fee so all children can access it, because we know that about 80% of eligible children cannot access CCAP right now because of limited funding. The second piece is higher reimbursement rates for CCAP providers so that they can afford to accept CCAP families, and those families have access to a wide range of providers. And lastly, the past couple of years, we've really taken on passing these what we call family-friendly child care and development block grant requirements and alignments with national best practices, which is kind of a vague way to say it. But to that end, this session we're really focusing on that third component, which actually also includes a rate increase for CCAP providers. And so we introduced a bill this session that would implement these family-friendly reforms. So again, it's just policy changes that create greater stability for children, their parents, and providers too, and would require that we at least use an updated child care market rate survey in setting our reimbursement rates, because right now we use data that's 7 years old and it's frankly just insufficient. So we introduced a bill, and the good news, it's gotten a couple of hearings. Also, Governor Dayton included some of these provisions in his budget proposal, which is fantastic. And then, as Claire alluded to, in the meantime, we've also learned that Minnesota is going to be the recipient of about $60 million in funding over 2 years from the federal government to help implement these changes. And so as a result, a couple of new proposals have been introduced that would basically implement our priorities, but only using those federal funds, which on the surface doesn't seem like a problem until you realize that those federal funds actually aren't sufficient to implement all of them in the way that we want them implemented. Because of that, Kids Can't Wait is in these last 6 weeks or so of session, we're really making the ask of, yes, please leverage those federal funds, but also make a state investment in the out years so that we can actually implement all of these and implement them well. And so, the provider rate increase, for example, it's the biggest ticket item, and we really can't get it up to where it needs to be at a minimum unless we also have a state investment. And so I realize that's all kind of general, and so if you have more detailed questions, please feel free to reach out to me, but I know I don't have 10 minutes to talk. So again, we just ask for anyone who is interested to make the ask that we implement these reforms and make a state investment to do so. Thank you. Oh, I have this still. Whoops, now I've done something. There. Whoops, did I?
waiting for the
I don't know
doula.
what I'm doing
The
to
doula.
I'm hitting back. Oh my gosh, sorry.
Caroline, the doula.
So who is this you?
Okay, yep.
Okay.
I'm waiting for the doula thing to come up. Okay. Yep, they have it.
But is
Caroline?
someone else operating
Caroline.
this right now?
Yeah, we gave it. Caroline, I'm gonna kill you, girl. My apologies. So while they're working on that, can you raise your hand if you know what a doula is? Oh my goodness. I am so impressed. I am. I don't think all of you raised your hands. So I don't have to go over what a doula does. It'll be up there in a minute, who we are, what our scope of practice is. So currently, we have so let me just talk about the Doula Coalition. So it currently consists of organizations, and that is Everyday Miracles, Ahava Birth Works, there is a Minnesota Prison Doula Project, Migijiwa, which is out, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, a Native American doula organization out in Bemidji. And then there's also a lot of doulas around Minnesota, rural Minnesota, and within the cities, individual doulas that we've come together, and we have so much support regarding a bill for the doula increase. So currently, I'll just talk about currently the reimbursement for medical assistance for 5 visits and a birth for a doula is $411. That is the top amount. I know, it's absolutely horrible. In Minnesota, private doulas charge anywhere from $800 to $2,000. So $411 is not sustainable. Organizations won't be able to continue to serve families in need. We need that doula increasement bill. We're asking for the amount that was initially on the table, which is $720, and that's more of a sustainable model. So currently the bill that's out there is House File 2178. We've gotten so much support around this bill, and support also from Senator Pinto, who's here. He's been amazing. And so there's so many things about this bill. The cost savings is $929 to $1,047. That's how much we are saving per birth to avoid cesarean sections, epidurals, NICU. So mothers are having their babies full term. Mothers are healthier, their babies are healthier, with just a little bit of support from someone who's knowledgeable about birth, prenatal. Just that support, the home visiting is a huge key in supporting these moms. So we would like to have support from the community. I don't know how much time I have. We're good? Okay. Support from the community. I had talking points, but I guess that's not going to show up. But we have a lot of support from the American College of OBGYN. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Also, the nurse midwives also are supporting this bill. So we really have a lot of support, and we are really hoping, we did get a hearing, and we believe that it's going to continue to pass. So we're excited, and the work that we do is very important. And coming to places like this, talk about why it's important to have the support, especially for mothers who have no support at all. And we specifically, at the organization that I work for, we serve moms that are very high-risk pregnancy, and a lot of times they will have no support at all. So having that sister friend, doula, there to support them means everything, and we're seeing very, very good birth outcomes. So that's it for my report. Good. Okay.
So we have a few minutes for questions and answers before we wrap up. So if you have a question for one of the coalitions, could you raise your hand and we'll... This was a lot to absorb. There is a hand over here. I think it's Lori.
Hey, Diane. We're trying to find your blog and we can't find it. Can you tell us how we can find it?
I do know a couple places where it is. It is on, it should be anyway, on Children's Defense Fund. There's a link to it on the Children's Defense Fund website. There's also a link to it on the Think Small blog as well. However, if you like, I'm able to send out links to people too for it.
All right.
Okay. Hi again,
Yes.
it's Mary Jo McGuire, Ramsey County, and a former state legislator. So I'm appreciative of all the work that you're doing in getting legislation. How are the legislators responding when you come to them with different coalitions? Like, you're all doing such important work, but you know, coalitions come together. Like, I know when I was a legislator, I'd say, well, you guys figure it out and then come to me when we know what that is. So how are legislators responding? I mean, I like that there's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of you up there, but sometimes I think legislators even need to have less, you know, they need to have like one strong statement about what we really need. So I'm just wondering if you've talked about that, because, you know, their eyes are going to glaze over, and I can talk like that because I used to be one. But, you know, and I'm totally supportive of all these efforts, and believe me, we need as much money as we can in this system. I mean, but I just wonder how they're reacting and how you're thinking about all that.
Anybody want to take that? Go ahead, Claire.
I'll start. Someone else jump in, please. I know one thing we've been hearing a lot this year from legislators is that they're really waiting for the Office of the Legislative Auditor report, which is on early childhood programs in Minnesota, which is scheduled to come out next week. And we've heard that again and again and again. I think we have a lot of different coalitions because we all want early childhood funding, but we all represent something different within early childhood. Home visiting is very different from childcare, which is very different from doulas, and so on and so forth. But we have heard over and over again that there is a real desire on the part of legislators believing all this work is good, but wanting to wait for that OLA report to see if it gives any guidance on where we should be putting additional funds or maybe how to streamline them.
I'll also add, the one thing I forgot to say in my intro about Voices and Choices is that we are a coalition of people of color and American Indians that are advocating on behalf of children of color and families of color. And so that's a uniqueness, I think, because what we have found is that we oftentimes legislators are wanting to hear what we have to say because there is so little, unfortunately, there's often so little interaction between families of color and legislation, and that's why we were created. And so part of our purpose is to actually be at the table when policies are being made, because many of these programs that we're talking about today are disproportionately have families of color represented in them, probably almost all of them. And so, and oftentimes people of color are not really in the policy making of these and the design of them, in addition to not even in the administration of them. And so we kind of have a little bit of a different niche about wanting to make sure that our voices are heard throughout all of the whole process of developing policies around early childhood.
I would add, so with a doula coalition, we have the challenge of having doulas from across Minnesota get on board. And because we were very specific about what we wanted, more money. So most people were like, yeah, we're on board with that. And I will add, because there's an emerging group of doulas of color, and like you just spoke of, Diane just spoke, sorry, I was looking for your name tag, just spoke about is how people of color are not so involved in politics because there's a lot of fear and trepidation involved in that because we don't know how the systems work. And as even for myself, the past few years working on this doula bill has been a huge learning curve for me. And I still have I'm still taken aback by being sometimes the only person of color in the room and not knowing the language to speak, not knowing to reference the senator in the room because I come from a community, we don't have a respected person in that way. Like, we respect folks that's doing the work. So, yeah. So anyhow, it's a whole culture shift. So.
Other legislative responses that you're picking up from Mary Jo's question?
Sure, I can say, this is Laura LaCroix-DeLune again. I think it's absolutely important that we're all working together and know what each other is working on. And so we try to do the alignment, and I think where you see us differentiating is when we have different coalitions going in for specific asks in different bills. And so I don't think any of us are trying to take over what each other is doing, but to represent the field in general and the diversity of what it takes to help our families get to where they want to be.
Very helpful. Thank you. Oh, Todd, we'll do one last.
Yeah,
and
this
then
is just an encouragement, and I know some of it's going on already, but 2018 is a hugely important year. We're going to elect a new governor. Anything your organizations can do to reach out to candidates for governor, to encourage their support of early childhood as a whole, it's huge. We started Minnesota's Future in 2009 because we knew there was going to be a new governor in 2010. And what are we going to ask him or her to do? So please, please, please have your membership, have yourself be in touch with those candidates, because if they don't hear from you, they're going to say, well, it's really not that big of an issue. So please.
I think Representative Pinto, you want to come and wrap us up? Did anybody else have something? July 16th, you want to announce that?
We do have another question. Yeah. Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry. This will be quick. I've worked in the field of early child, but now I'm working in oral health, and I think that and health, and there's an idea for us in that field. There is a safety net coalition that has been formed for all of those folks who are serving our most vulnerable families in terms of health, those other programs, so like our Minnesota Oral Health Coalition seeds to the Safety Net Coalition to do its advocacy. And then within that Safety Net Coalition, the other coalitions are in subcommittees around their specific topic. Just a thought. I mean, it still brings different voices to the table, but one voice that then goes to the legislature. So I think it's doable, and we could look to some other industries for their ideas.
Okay. Well, of course, part of the purpose of the forums here, right, is to have a sharing of these agendas, and over time we're bringing all of us together. But in the meantime, we have some amazing people who are doing the work, so we all just join in thanking them. And you can stay where you are. And I'm just wrapping up for a minute, so please stay where you are. So I want to give a big thank you to folks for making their way through the snow, and those who didn't, thank you to our webcast friends for sticking with us, those of you who did for the full time through logistical hiccups and all. I want to make sure to just acknowledge a few folks. You've heard from Commissioner Mary Jo McGuire and Mary Vanderwerf from St. Paul School Board. Are there other elected officials that I may have missed? I just want to make sure to acknowledge if there's folks in the room. And so thank you to the two of them, who are amazing champions, and of course Representative Peterson and Senator Wickland and Senator Ralph. I want to just ask, so these are organized with the St. Thomas and St. Kate's School of Social Work, and we're grateful to the Dean, to Professor Catherine Hill for putting this together. My volunteers and constituents in my neighborhood, I'm so grateful, Jessica Griffith and Chris Subramanian, I don't know if he's still here. Yes, many thanks. And oh, there he is in the back, yes. And if the elders, actually, if those folks, but also the elders for infants could please stand. I just want to thank this amazing team of early childhood advocates. Can you all stand up? And especially Jane Kretzman for moderating us as usual. So this is all put together with volunteers and then with the support of the School of Social Work, and so I'm so grateful for that. The point was made about gubernatorial election that Todd Otis said, and I want to point out we are exploring having in October, having this be the setting for a gubernatorial forum, opportunity for the candidates to really focus on prenatal to 3 issues. So please keep an eye on that. Yes, July 16th is the next prenatal to 3 policy forum. So please mark that on your calendars for this same time and place. And clearly there's a lot of work to be done, but it feels like we are getting there together. So again, thank you all. Thanks to our panelists, and let's go out there on behalf of little kids. Thanks so much. Take care. All right.